Can I ask if the live stream has been started? Okay, so before we formally start the meeting, I'll check the remote attendees can hear and be heard, but there aren't any, so I don't think that. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing. So it's recorded. No emergency drills are planned. Should the alarm sound, please leave by the nearest available exit and assemble at the designated points of the car park. Please ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and also making an official recording. To ensure recording quality is maintained, please keep background noise to a minimum. The recording forms part of the public record of the meeting and will be available via the Council's website shortly after the meeting is concluded. Please remember that what you say and do in this meeting has a global reach and your words and actions should be chosen carefully. Thank you. I will now formally open the meeting and I would like to welcome some new people to the meeting. Councillor Bowen is attending instead of Councillor Matthews and Councillor Balls instead of Councillor Phillips. Thank you. And Leanne, welcome to you. This is your first meeting as well. Thank you. So we've received apologies from Councillor Roger Phillips and Councillor Balson is the substitute. I'll go then to item 3, which is declarations of interest. And here I need to receive.
So, Mr. Chairman, might I just say, Councillor Matthews gives his apologies.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Yeah. So, declarations of interest, to receive declarations of interest in respect of Schedule 1, Schedule 2, and other interests from members of the panel. Are there any Schedule 1, Schedule 2, or other interest for items on the agenda today? I see none. Thank you. Item 4, to approve and sign the minutes of the meeting held on 21st of July. No matters of accuracy have been notified, so would panel members who attended that meeting please confirm if they are content that the meetings be approved as an accurate record. Thank you. Questions from members of the public? There are none, and none from councillors either. So we move on to item 7, which is the substantive item for this meeting. And this is to recommend the pay policy statement 2023-24 to full council for approval and publication. And I think this is to be introduced by Tracy Sampson, Director of Human Resources and Organisational Development. Tracy.
Thank you, Leader. Forgive me, but in the spirit of someone who's done the work and presenting it to the panel, if you don't mind, I'd ask Leanne to introduce the item.
Yes, that's fine.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. As you're aware, it is a requirement under the Localism Act that authorities set out a statement on its approach to pay on an annual basis. It's usually a statement of policies that are already in place, and the role of Employment Panel is to recommend the pay policy to full council on the 10th of February 2023 for publication on the council website. There are some changes to the pay policy this year from previous years. The scope of chief officers have been reported and reviewed in line with the definitions under the Act. And also the pay policy statement clarifies the council's approach to managing situations where there's a different national pay award by different negotiating bodies. The pay awards are usually aligned and kept the same, which means that whatever percentage rate or change in holiday that is agreed nationally is the same for all staff across the main pay scales. However, there has been some differences in the last 2 awards, which haven't happened before and may not happen again, but it has caused us some technical problems. So we intend to fix this problem by saying that where the national pay award offer is different for staff on main pay scales, the Chief Executive reserves the right to apply the greater pay award to all staff where there's a sensible case to do so. So, for instance, this year the NJC have awarded an additional day's leave from the 1st of April 2023, but this hasn't been applied to JNC or the Chief Executives. Herefordshire has the same leave entitlement for all staff, so usually other authorities will have different entitlements based on seniority. So the pay policy states this will be awarded in Herefordshire to the JNC and the Chief Executive to ensure equity and also that the day will be given in January, not in April. So it's in line with our leave year and to ensure that staff do have the full entitlement. We're also aware the National Employers of Cause Council's issues with this, and the new round of consultation for the 2023 pay award specifically asked councils if they want all pay bodies to award the same. So we think that it's unlikely to happen again, but we do have a problem that we do need to deal with now. The next change is the inclusion of a visual of staff distributions across grades. The gender pay gap data has been included in the statement as requested by the panel in previous years. The figures that are reported in this report are for 2021. The calculations for 2022 will be available in February, in line with the publication of the Equality in the Workforce report. And so the figure in this can be updated before publication. And the salary ratio has also been updated, and this is reduced from previous years because the Chief Executive's pay award was proportionately lower than the pay award for other staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. So, members of the panel, any questions? I think there are some on there. Councillor Paulson.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think I'm substituting today, so I do apologise if I don't understand everything that has previously been approved in prior years. But I guess I've picked up this policy from a member of a public perspective, and that's sort of where some of my questions are coming from. I found it very difficult because this document is driven by legislation, and we have to have specific things in here for legislation. It doesn't necessarily align to everything that is happening within the council, and I'd just like to ask a couple of questions around that. So the first one, I guess, is the around paragraph 3 and specifically 3.1 and the table in there. We list a number of the posts, but this doesn't align to our organisational chart that's published with our constitution. So as a member of the public, if I'm looking at, okay, well, this is our organisational structure, now that we go to the pay policy to see how that works, I found it very difficult to align the two. So I guess that's my first question, why we can't put something that makes it a bit more readable from the general public perspective.
Are you happy for me to respond?
Yeah, please do.
Thank you. Lisa, I'd been given a heads up by Councillor Balderson that this was going to be a question, which was really helpful. So I've had a bit of time to think about how we deal with it. The pay policy statement sets out specifically which posts and which level of posts we have to report in this document. That doesn't neatly align to the posts we want to put on our structure chart on our main council page. But what we could do to make life to make this clearer for people is, rather than put that structure chart in this document because it changes frequently, is put a link to that structure chart into this document. So then once people have read these posts, they can click on a link and go and see how that looks visually in this council, if that would be sensible to the panel.
The only thing with that though is, for example, if I look at the organisational chart, we don't have Service Director Safeguarding and Family Support in the organisational chart that sits with the Constitution. So it's, even if we did put the link in, I guess, is it necessary? Is this just, what are we expecting members of the public to do with this document, not read it? Or is this just a tick box exercise in terms of, we just need to publish this information? And if so, then I think this document should be as slim as possible, because we're just meeting our legislative requirements. But if we wanted it to add value for someone reading it, I think there are a number of things within it that are inconsistent. And another example around that would be the gender pay gap. The gender pay gap figures aren't going to be published for a little while longer. We do publish it in many other locations, like our annual governance statement. So, and it's not a specific requirement of the legislation that it's included in here. So that would just be another example of, you know, what is the purpose of this document and what really should we be having in it?
I think the last question about why is it in here is it's in here because the employment panel asked it to be in here. So it's, everything is together in the same place. So, yes, there's a 1 month delay because of the way that information is published, but that, I guess, wasn't taken into account at the time. But we wanted everything to be together rather than sort of hiding the pay gap somewhere else. So I think that's the explanation for that. And I think you're right about, you know, what would the public do with this particular bit of information? And I'm not sure there's an awful lot that they would do. The attention is always on the highest paid, isn't it? Rather than anything else. And it's shouting clear and loud as to, you know, total transparency as to what people are paid. As for their position in the authority, this is as we said, a statutory requirement that you need to identify who people report to, and if the reporting line is such that it doesn't come within this document, and then there's no requirement to actually go. We could list all the people at certain who are HOS 1 and HOS 2 and HC 13 and that, but I don't think we need to list absolutely everybody who's working for the local authority. Yeah.
I think if I might, Leader, that they are two different things. The structure chart that we publish on our website is a visual representation of the council's most senior leaders. This is not, this is something different. This is a list of people who report in a certain way to certain people who which the Localism Act say we have to be open and transparent about their pay. They are two very different things.
Yeah.
But I do understand from a public perception that's confusing.
And is that why, for example, the graph on the last page doesn't align to the table in 3.1? Because, for example, in the graph, it says that there's 8 H0 or HOS ones, whilst there isn't in the table. There's 2 direct DIR2s, there's 3 DIR1s, but that doesn't align to the numbers in this table.
There are,
So is that,
there are 8 HOS ones in the table.
in the graph, it is saying that there are 9. And they're saying in the graph there's 3 DIR2s, but there's 2 in the table. There's 2 in the graph of DIR1s, but there's 3 in the table. So the table doesn't align to the graph. So is that because the graph's representing our organisational chart and the table is representing legislatively what we need to publish?
Correct. Your
That's
last
correct.
statement. Yeah. This graph, this paper only reports what we have to do from a legislative perspective.
So then I don't think that graph, well, that graph is,
Well, this is all staff. The graph is all staff.
so I think there perhaps needs to be some narrative around that to them because it doesn't align to the table.
I see Christie's point. This one says there's 2 DIR1 and 3 DIR2, but the table says it's the other way around, 3 DIR1 and 2 DIR2.
And there's a few other differences.
That's true.
My tiny, I mean, there could be several things at play. Firstly, they're not necessarily reporting on the same things. So the chart is a representation of the entire organisation. The list is the posts we have to define. We have to report as defined by the Localism Act. There might also be a timing issue. So there might be an inaccuracy in that the chart might have been produced before the list and things might have changed. So I think what we need to do is just double check that the information is current and accurate. And then I think what I would do is ask employment panel whether the chart adds anything or is unhelpful, because the chart can be removed. They're not required to include the chart.
Okay, does anybody have a view then as to, it sounds to me as the chart might be confusing.
There's no narrative with the chart. I think if there was some sort of narrative and maybe the link to the organisational chart is in that section, then that might be helpful. But at the moment, with no narrative, I don't find it as helpful.
And I looked at it, I think, oh, that's quite interesting to see the number of people who are at a particular grade. So from a transparency perspective, I think it would be a shame to take it down. Councillor Harvey.
For me, I think it's helpful to provide a pictorial representation of the tabular information, because not everybody is good at interpreting lists and numbers, and sometimes seeing how those are represented in terms of the number of the actual distribution of staff in a graphical way can be helpful. So if it's helpful to make it clear that the graph is a representation of the numbers in the table above, and we make sure that they're both correct in terms of showing the same information, it may be helpful to some people to see the data represented that way.
Yes, and interesting, at the top of it talks about the structure as of 1st of April 2022. So that could well explain, Councillor Balderson, why the numbers are the wrong way around, because we have had changes. So perhaps you could just take that away, Tracy, and just check the accuracy of those records, but I think we will keep the chart in there, because I think it's a picture paints 1,000 words, and I think something like that is appropriate. Any more questions, Councillor Balderson? We do welcome.
Well done. I just had one further question at the moment, which, two. Page 18 of the pack, the last paragraph on the page, those posts listed below are reported where there is an employee in post at the time of writing. Roles that are vacant or having an interim worker are not included. Now, this is different to last year. So last year we noted where the positions were vacant. So I just had a question as to why we're changing and no longer and reporting it in a different manner.
Tracy?
I have to take this one on the chin, Leader. This was me, not Leanne. When we were producing the report and the table, it got really confusing because we've got a number of interim managers in economy and environment. But I think that's really good feedback, and we can include the vacant post before we send this on its way to full council, if that's what the panel would prefer. It's quite simple for us to do. Yeah.
Okay, if you do that.
I think
No
that's
problem.
great.
I considered that last year.
And then my last question was 7.2 on page 20 of the pack around remuneration and recruitment. It indicates that the chief executive is on a spot salary, as specified in the statement. I just had a question, what is a spot salary? Because it's not defined within the document. And last year, both the chief executive and directors were on spot salaries, so I just wanted to understand the change there as well, please.
Tracy?
Thank you. A spot salary is where somebody is paid on one specific point. There's no sliding pay scale, so there's no incremental progression. What has changed is our job titles. So our corporate directors are also paid in the same way. Our service directors are not. So I think for ease, the word director was removed, but we will clarify in the report for you that corporate directors are also paid on a spot salary, and we'll define what that means if that's what the panel would like us to do.
Seems sensible.
Thank you, Chair.
So the service directors are, because they're HRS 1 rather than DIR 1 and DIR 2, they are on variable salaries depending upon length of time in the position. Thank you. So Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering about the gender pay gap. And obviously, it is statutory that everyone doing the same job gets paid the same sort of money. And this is really a measure of how many people, or how many people of one gender or another are in the senior posts, which obviously is very indicative of what the amount of, shall we say, women in senior positions are. And if there are less of them, then the gap gets bigger. I wonder how many other gaps there are, whether it be disability, age, and so on. And is that relevant, and should we be thinking about these as well? Is it possible to do that as well? Is it worthwhile? Would it be fair as well?
Tracy, do you have a particular?
I think, Leader, this is an area that the government are looking at the moment. We are expecting that there will be requirements on us as an organisation to report information for other protected characteristics. We don't know what that will be yet or when it will be, but I would imagine that is forthcoming for us. It takes a considerable resource in order to compile this data. It's a really complicated exercise. So if we were to expand our reporting on this, I think we need to just be mindful of the resource it requires.
Thank you.
Yes, I'd just like to ask a couple of questions, maybe to expand and allow Tracy to clarify some. When we ask our staff to provide information to us, is it mandatory that they declare whether or not they have a disability, or is that something that is a voluntary declaration? How accurate is the information and complete that we hold on that sort of thing? So that's the first question.
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, in the past, it has not been mandatory for people to provide that information, and we haven't had a recruitment system which allows us to capture that information at the earliest opportunity. We do now. So going forwards, we capture that information as soon as somebody starts in the organisation. So we've got a bit of catch up to do because there are some gaps in our reporting, but we are in a relatively strong position from the data that we've got. I don't know if you've got a more up-to-date picture on the top of your head, but I think I was going to say don't quote me, but I'm about to quote myself. I think we're over 90% in terms of almost all the protected characteristics information that we've got, but we've still got a lot of work to do, and that work is planned for the next 2 months in asking people to fill those gaps for us. Anyone who works in this organisation right now can go onto Business World and add their protected characteristics data if they wish, and that's what we want to encourage everybody to do. But every gap that we've got in that data makes reporting more difficult.
Thank you. And we do actually have a staff survey, and we provide information on that. Is that a document that comes to the employment panel at the moment, or is it something that we just publish on our website?
Thank you, Councillor. And the staff survey doesn't currently come to employment panel at all, I don't think. It doesn't.
Scrutiny.
Does go to scrutiny, and as portfolio holder you will see it, but it doesn't come here. It could do. There isn't a decision for the panel to take, but it might be useful information.
Yeah, we could note it though, couldn't we? And just have it, as something that is recorded as coming here for noting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, could I propose that we do that, just so that it comes through the employment panel as something that we do know and recognise, and have an opportunity to ask questions about it?
I think that's a good idea. All show of hands on that. It's all in favour. Thank you.
And the last one is on the gender pay gap. Am I right in recalling from the staff survey information, where there's also more detailed information about gender pay gap that is published, that we have a large number of female employees who are on lower salary points in the pay spine?
You're testing my memory, but I think that would be correct, yes.
Okay. I think it would be interesting for us as a committee to actually sort of look at that data and have a think about what it actually means. I think gender pay gap is something that, taking a sort of a spot view of where we're at, doesn't really tell the story. We kind of need to take a longitudinal view of gender pay, and also to understand what the gender mix is for different points along pay spine to understand what that actually means in terms of the kind of jobs that men and women are doing in our organisation, and maybe ask ourselves some questions about what makes them attractive to men and to women, and maybe what makes it difficult for men and for women to take up those jobs, and whatever their pay is related to the specific of the job. But I think, you know, it would be helpful for us to maybe understand a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Tracy?
Leader, if I might propose that in February, we're due to have our latest gender pay gap information sent to us. I think it might be helpful if we use that, bring it back to this committee so we can do a bit of a deep dive into it, together with a gender pay gap action plan. Because there's lots of good evidence now published by the government, evidence-based suggestions on what an organisation might do to address its gender pay gap.
Very good, yes, thank you. And it might be interesting seeing the analysis of the survey of staff at the same time. Two together. Councillor Balderson.
Yes, Chair, can I just make a comment on that? I know late last year, the Scrutiny Management Board looked at the workforce strategy, and within that was things like the results of the survey, and using that information, and I think we made a number of recommendations to the workforce strategy. So my question would be, to what point does the employment panel, I guess it's that relationship and making sure that there's no duplication between what Scrutiny are doing and what the employment panel's responsibilities are, and not being a regular member of employment panel, I'm not 100% sure where that line is, and what communication needs to happen between those two groups to ensure that we're not duplicating effort.
Yes, that was kind of going through my mind as to, you know, the Scrutiny panel makes recommendations, those recommendations don't come to the employment panel. They presumably get through to the portfolio holder, and might be worth having a quick look in terms of reference of this panel to work out whether it has that role and function, which is getting more complicated as we go along. Tracy, I see your finger poised to say something. But,
I mean, I'm not too worried about duplication at this point. I think we've already identified that it'd be useful for employment panel to look at this material. You know, if we then end up treading on toes, you know, then we can work that out. But we've identified that there's a gap in bringing that data into this employment panel, which is statutory body that sets the pay policy. So let's do it, and let's worry about.
And then maybe just have
later
information from Scrutiny, providing a little bit of narrative around that, because if they've identified things and already have made recommendations, then probably as the employment panel you should be aware of it as well. Yeah.
sounds as if you might have found a new role on the employment panel.
No.
Tracy, you were poised.
I was going to agree with Councillor Chance. I don't have a problem with the information going to two separate bodies. I think we're bright enough to work that out between ourselves, how we manage that. I think employment panel largely priority function, from my perspective, is to make recommendations to the Chief Executive or comment on our policies and procedures and our decisions that we make in relation to pay. And to do that, you need the right information. So I do think you do need the information about the gender pay gap and the wider Star Survey information.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Bowen, I know you had one. I don't know if you had another.
But no, just that I think that Councillor Balderson's note about there should be a bit of narrative joining up the graphs and the other statements would be useful.
Let's look at that. Yeah. Councillor Chance?
I've got a bunch of questions.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, and brief comments. I do want to comment on paragraph 8 of the report, which identifies that the chief execs, that our pay ratio between the lowest and highest paid is declining, and I think that is a positive thing, and I want us to recognise that. I know that the pay ratios in Worcestershire County Council and Bristol appear to have declined massively in the last year, which I think is interesting. So if I could ask officers to just double check that, because that seems surprising. Moving on, right, paras 2.1 and 2.2. So para 2.1 talks about pay grade for posts up to 7HC. NJC is used for pay grade up to 7HC, and para 2.2 says NJC is the basis for grading up to 11HC. So those two sentences seem to me to be incompatible. I don't know if I'm not understanding.
Forgive me, I was holding my head there because I'm not sure how I explain this. They're not incompatible, they are accurate. So the 2.1 describes how we evaluate a job, so how many points we give a job and decide where it sits on that pay scale. And we use the NJC pay scheme, evaluation scheme, to do that for jobs up to HC7. Beyond that, we use HAY. So that
Okay.
part decides where you sit on the scale.
Yeah. And then 2.2 decides what you're actually paid.
Correct.
All right, thank you for explaining that, because that, yeah, all right, I understand that now. And I've looked up what the Salisbury Committee is, and I've raised the gender neutral language thing with you. Right, point 4.1. Lowest paid employees is defined as those paid on full-time equivalent salaries on spinal column 2HC SCP2. So 2 questions about this. One, why is the lowest paid 2HC SCP2 when the chart actually shows both things start at 1? And 2 is that the table further down the thing shows that I think 2HC SCP2 is £10.60 an hour, but have we not decided to pay the real living wage, which is £10.90 an hour?
Thank you. I think we could tweak the chart for clarity because spinal column 0.1 is still in existence. We just don't use it or don't pay anybody on it. So for full transparency, it's included in the table, but I think we should probably put a marker next to it saying not used.
Okay.
Just to make that really clear, would that be okay?
Yeah.
And then the second part of the question is, you are absolutely correct. At an employment panel informal meeting last week, it was recommended to the Chief Executive that the council would pay the real living wage for all its employees. This document was produced before that meeting, so we will be able to update that and reflect it in this document before it makes its way onto full council in February.
Okay, thank you. And it did occur to me, because I think that table is from 1st April 2022, and so do we always update on the 1st of April 2022? So even though the real living wage has gone up, I think in September it went up, does that mean we are going to catch up before the 1st of April 23, or not until then?
The pay award, which will take effect from the 1st of April 23, hasn't even begun its way through the negotiating route at a national level yet. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't know what that is until well into this year. So that table will always be behind, but we will pay the real living wage at the prevailing rate at the current time. It might not be reflected in that chart.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Right, the gender pay gap. So I did note that this is the same information as we published to full council in March last year, but you've explained that it's being updated. Is it just not possible to calculate that earlier in the year than February?
If I may. It can be reported earlier. Unfortunately, the timing of my appointment and the transfer between skills and duties between the Equalities Department and HR, there's been some work around things like that. So just because of the position of getting the data and getting myself in position to be able to produce that calculation, I'll be doing it in February, ready to be published on 30th of March.
Okay, fab, understood. But maybe in future years, for this meeting of the employment panel, it would be technically possible to have the
Yes.
the up-to-date. Okay, fabulous. Completely understand this. Starting a new job is busy time. And I completely agree with Liz's point about we need a longitudinal view, not a spot view. So now we've got data for last year and this year, but presumably we've had to publish gender pay gap information since 2015, 18? Okay, so could we put that in? I think that would be really helpful to see, and the materials that you talked about and Tracy in terms of sort of recommendations and so forth. And I think that's all my questions. Thank you.
Excuse me, Chair.
Yeah.
May I just add one more thing on 6.4? If I look at where our majority of staff sit within the council, I'd just like to ask or understand why, for example, Connexus Housing Limited was picked as how did we choose who these comparisons were? And I think what I'd probably like, if we were going to get any value out of these comparisons, it's try to pick some more relevant comparatives to where majority of our staff might sit and the types of jobs that they do, because that would be more useful, I think, if for the general member of the public, if they were ever going to look at this document.
Tracy?
Thank you. Well, we normally only get information for local authorities, so I imagine we got really excited that we could get information for these organisations because it's published on the government's website. So that is probably why we've produced information for a wider range of organisations. Completely take the councillor's point, though, that it might be really helpful just to have a list of local authorities so that we're measuring apples with apples.
And Tracy, going back to that chart, so they've got Herefordshire Council 2020 is 8.2% lower. The 3 or 4 lines further down, it says it's 13.9% for 2021, which is a huge change. Is that correct?
It is correct.
So why are we doing so much better in 2020 compared to 2021? I was trying to think who was in place in 2020.
It's difficult to answer that question without digging right into the weeds of the data and seeing the distribution of pay and grades. And I think that's the piece of work that we need to do next.
Okay. Thank you. Right. Well, a few actions there. Thank you. Councillor Harvey. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just check where in the document where referring to median and equating it with average, is that because that happens to be the case in the instances where that language is used? Because median and average are different things.
I don't know the answer to that. I think I'd have to review the whole document to check that that's accurate from that perspective, but I understand the question, so if you don't mind, I'll go and do that.
Thank you.
Tracy, would it be possible when this report goes to full council that it notes the various recommendations from this group so that the rest of the council will be aware of what we're doing?
Yeah, not a problem at all. We can put a list of all the things that we've changed following this meeting.
Yeah, great, thank you. Good. Any more questions? No, thank you very much. So the recommendation to the panel is that the pay policy in Appendix A is recommended to full council. We'll show of hands all in favour. Thank you very much. So thank you everyone for attending. Can the technical support confirm live stream and the recording must stop?